everyone. Well, we have a very special surprise. Again, since we were pre-taping our interviews for this Mother's Day weekend special, we were able to contact Lynn Mathre and invite her to join us here today. And she did ever so graciously agree to participate. Now, I have to tell you, I spent quite a bit of time talking to Lynn today, and wow, she is a powerhouse of information. Lynn is a registered nurse and longtime medical cannabis activist. She is also the co-founder and president of Patients Out of Time, and her primary focus is, and has always been, the science behind the medicinal value of cannabis. She is wonderfully outspoken and certainly one of the most driven women joining us this weekend. So without further ado, let's run Lynn's interview.
Lynn, are you there?
I'm here.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us today on our Mother's Day weekend special.
Glad to be here. Great idea to bring this information out on Mother's Day.
Yeah, we have to do it. Someone has to, right? Now, Lynn, you have a long history in cannabis law reform. What I would like to know, and I always like to get background on our guest and really find out what triggered them to become active in the movement. So can you give our listeners a little bit of history and tell us what inspired you to make the reinstatement of cannabis medicine your focus? It really seems to be a life mission at this point.
It sure has turned into one. I guess it just goes back to nursing and being a nurse. Back in the early 1980s, while working at a hospital in Washington State, and my husband, Al Byrne, was still in the military, a patient came to our hospital, the little hospital I was working at, who was in the clinical trials for Marinol that were going on at the University of Washington in Seattle. And we're in a little hospital north of there. And as he was coming in, the director of nursing got all upset and excited, and because this patient was bringing in marijuana pills with him, and she didn't know what to do. And I was the charge nurse there. So, we just said, it shouldn't be a problem. We'll take his medicine. We can lock it up in the narcotics cabinet with the others, and let's go on. And then I talked with this gentleman. He was an older fellow with cancer. He was in the clinical trials using Marinol for the nausea and vomiting. His son and daughter were there with him, grown adults, and were telling me how Dad was finally eating now that he had this Marinol pill. And at the time, I didn't even know if we knew the name was Marinol at the time. Like I said, it was clinical trials going on. And since that time, we now know Marinol, synthetic THC, is available for patients under prescription. And it was, back in the 80s when it was first put out, it was a Schedule II medication, just available for cancer chemotherapy patients for the nausea and vomiting. And as time went on, and there was no diversion, no problems with this drug, it was actually downregulated to Schedule III, meaning it has less restrictive problems related to physicians writing prescriptions. And that's the first time any drug has been downregulated, making it less restrictive. We've heard about a lot of drugs being more restrictive, like ecstasy, and moving it into Schedule I or something like this. So that was different. So that sparked me thinking, oh, well, that's interesting. They're actually making a pill out of THC. From Washington State, we moved to Ohio. Al was doing his last tour in the service, and I went back to grad school at Case Western University, and I ended up doing my thesis, my master's thesis, on marijuana disclosure to healthcare professionals. Now, at the time, I was thinking more on terms of recreational marijuana users being a large population do healthcare professionals even ask about their use? Are we following it? Are we being responsible? That if this is a drug of abuse, what do we know about it and what's happening to patients? So I ended up doing a survey, and I wanted a large population, so I went through NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and they were eager to do such a survey as well among their members, so they sent out my survey in their newsletter. They call it the leaflet. They sent my survey out there with instructions for people to fill out the survey, return it to NORML, and NORML would then send it to me, and that would help them feel that they were anonymous. And it was a lot of general demographic questions. It had questions about their use, how much they used in a day, how often they used it, et cetera. And at the end, well, then, of course, the basis of my thesis was, would they tell healthcare professionals? So I asked them questions like, at your last, visit to the hospital or to your physician, were you asked about your use of cannabis? If you were asked, would you disclose the use? If you would not disclose, why not? Just a lot of questions about that. And then finally, my last question was, what are your health concerns about cannabis? And I gave them options. They could say none, even though I'm a heavy user, none, even though I'm a moderate user, or I worry about my brain, I worry about its effects on my lungs, I worry about its effects on my heart, I worry about its effects on a fetus for pregnant women. And I had some other stuff. And then I had other where they could write in. So a lot of people, well, I ended up with almost 900 responses to this survey, so it was a nice big sample. And what was surprising to me was a lot of people, instead of writing concerns at the bottom, they were writing in, I use this for multiple sclerosis, or I have seizure disorder and this helps prevent my seizures. And I just saw a lot of write-ins for medical use. So here I am. The thesis was done in 1985, and I've got this data, and it just really surprised me. I learned about Marinol, the THC pill, and I knew cannabis was okay for nausea and vomiting and for spasticity and for glaucoma. But these other, issues, migraine, headaches, just other things were coming in, and I was just really impressed. And then that got me tied in with NORML. They asked me to be on their Council for Marijuana and Health. And what that is, it's more like an advisory council to the to NORML on studies that come out about marijuana. Is it a good study? Is it legitimate? Was it flawed in any way? And what do the findings really show? And so that council was just a whole bunch of researchers and healthcare professionals, and we'd try to respond to NORML and give them, an interpretation of the study, good, bad, whatever. That went on for several years, and the more I learned about medical cannabis, well, at the same time, the other thing that was happening was at that time, again, we're at mid-'80s, I meet Bob Randall, who was the first patient to get medical marijuana from the federal government. And that's a whole long story in itself. But once I learned about this, and then I met Bob, as I stayed with NORML, both my husband and myself ended up on the board of directors of NORML, and we got involved in their conferences. They have annual conferences that NORML puts on. And in 1990, we were responsible for that particular conference and had the idea that there were 5 patients in the United States who got cannabis from the federal government. Only 5. So we thought, why don't we get them together and have a panel? I thought, one, it would be great for them to meet each other since they were from around the country, and it would make a great story. Well, everything seemed to fall into place in 90. We ended up, that conference was picked up and recorded by C-SPAN. It was held in D.C., so they happened to be there. So the film crew came, and they recorded this conference. And that panel, the 5 patients, talking about getting their marijuana from the federal government, what they used it for, how it helped, was just a real eye-opener, a very, very interesting panel. C-SPAN aired that thing for about a week's time.
Wow.
It aired different pieces of the conference, but specifically that panel. And I tell you, Normal got like 40,000 phone calls that week. It was just, the phone was off the hook, just ringing, 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 for so many people finding out, really? You can get marijuana from the federal government? How do you do this? What do we need to do? And that literally started this onslaught of applications going into the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to see if, particular patients could get access to cannabis. Again, remember the times, this is mid-1980s, and at that time the HIV/AIDS epidemic was alive and well, and people were scared. And AIDS patients were finding that it really helped them with the medications they were taking for the HIV virus. They could, very toxic medications and hard to handle medications, leaving them, with a lot of serious nausea and vomiting, like cancer chemotherapy drugs. And the cannabis seemed to help. And HIV patients found that it helped them with other things as well, increase their appetite, but helped them with some pain issues. So most, not all, but most of these applications were from HIV/AIDS patients. And so what do you think the government does? It shuts down the program. That's their response. We can't let this be popular. In fact, one of the comments made by someone in the Department of Health was, we don't want patients having rampant sex. So their homophobia was alive and well. They figured gay people with HIV who were HIV positive would smoke cannabis and then just go out and have rampant sex. And it was like, so far from the truth, the fact that these people were just hoping to stay alive, doing something, and the cannabis seemed to help them. So anyway, it's kind of a long story, but it was just different patient instances, that survey, then working with Normal and seeing these first 5 patients that, my eyes were really open to how